When I was young, I became lame because of saving Wei Xun. People in Beijing all jokingly call me the lame girl behind my back. Wei Xun and I were engaged, but he never married me. In the winter of the 5th year, I ran into him and some other people watching the snow in the attic. When he mentioned me, his tone was indifferent. "Why would you marry a cripple?" I calmly burned the marriage certificate and went to Wei's house alone to cancel the engagement. The day I left Beijing was sunny. Wei Xun came after me and advised me not to get angry with him, lest I lose the opportunity to become a high-ranking official in the Wei family. I shook my head and whipped the horse behind me. You see me like a frog in a well looking at the moon in the sky. I have never cared about the family background of the Wei family.
1.
In the winter of the 5th year of their engagement, a cold wind blew in through the curtains, making the fire in the boat even brighter. The wind and snow were blowing fiercely, and Wei Xun was admiring the snow from a pavilion by the lake. I looked for the place with my umbrella. "Brother Wei has been engaged for 5 years. When will you become the groom?" The wind blew up a corner of the curtain, and I saw Wei Xun frowning and looking tired. He laughed lightly, his tone extremely disdainful. "Why would you marry a cripple?" My hand that was trying to lift the curtain stopped in midair. Fine snow blew into my eyes. There was a sting, and I blinked slowly. His friend laughed. "Everyone in the capital knows that Miss Qiao broke her leg to save you. Please don't let her down." The wine bottle was thrown back onto the table, leaving a small stain. Wei Xun glanced at the man indifferently, his tone cold. "She saved me by coincidence, and then spread the news all over town, using her reputation to force me to marry her. She planned this marriage just to get close to me. She is so scheming and calculating that it's hard for me not to hate her." Everyone was shocked and asked him if the marriage was over. Wei Xun's voice was cold. "I'll marry a cripple who's just repaying my kindness. How can he be worth my true love?" I stood outside the curtain, stunned for a long time. The umbrella fell at my feet. Before I knew it, my shoulders were covered with snow. In his eyes, my marriage to him was planned by me. Before I was 15, I grew up in Chu. My mother was a country doctor. She married my father when he was still poor. Later, my father, Qiao Li, passed the imperial examination and married the daughter of a minor official in the capital. He wrote a letter to invite my mother to live with him, but my mother refused to be a concubine until her death. Many nights, she stroked my hair and tears fell. The year I came of age, my mother became seriously ill. The herbs are expensive and we can't afford them. I went to the Qiao residence and begged them to save my mother. The mistress, Lu, asked me to kowtow 100 times before she would give me alms. When I went back, my mother's lamp had run out of oil. In front of the sickbed, she traced the purple bruises on my forehead with her skinny fingertips and kept vomiting blood. "I'm sorry. I was forcibly dragged onto the carriage by people sent by the Qiao family." The curtains are lowered, and one last look is taken. Mother's pale hands fell down powerlessly and never moved again. Qiao Li abandoned his wife and married another woman, which was a stain after all. So he just thought of me as his cousin who was staying at his house. The noble ladies in the capital were on good terms with my younger sister, and they kept finding ways to ostracize and bully me. Since I had no knowledge of music, they forced me to play the qin in public. Amid their shrill laughter, I was at a loss and kept lowering my head. There was sarcasm in the mistress' eyes. "After all, I am a distant relative from the countryside, and I came to your house to beg for money. Please forgive me for making fun of you." After the banquet, the mistress and her younger sister sat in the carriage, their eyes full of sarcasm. "There are not enough carriages and horses in the palace tonight. I am sorry to have you wait for a while." I waited for a long time that night, until it got darker and the snow got heavier. There was no carriage to pick me up. I walked down the mountain in the heavy snow, 1 foot deep and 1 foot shallow. Just happened to save the injured Wei Xun. I dragged him and avoided being pursued, but my leg was broken and I became lame. I never thought that Wei Xun would be so suspicious that he even thought my saving him was a scheme. The Wei family has power over the government and the opposition. With just a simple search, he would have known how I was abandoned by my mistress in the snow. But he was unwilling to even check. I understood immediately. Over the years, he has come to believe that I am a calculating and scheming girl. He doesn't care what kind of person I am.
So he won't know.
In fact, I have always been sincere to him.
2.
The umbrella at my feet was blown up by the north wind. At first I was taken back to Qiao Mansion. My mistress and stepsister regarded me as a thorn in their eyes and a thorn in their flesh, and they rubbed me in every way. He ate cold soup every day and wore thin and tattered clothes. I also looked for opportunities to complain to my biological father. But Xiao Li, dressed in plain clothes, didn't even look at me across the distant table. Qiaoji, people's desires should not be too big. If the Qiao family hadn't taken you back, you would have become a beggar on the street. I was stunned. The smoke from the stove was rising, and his expression was a little dull. Also, don't mention your mother again. Later, I couldn't stand the cold and hunger anymore. When he was fighting for food with the dog because he was hungry, he was caught by Qiao Yi and his men. It was raining heavily that day, and she stepped my face into the dog bowl. Sister Shu, how come you live without any dignity? The embroidered shoes moved down, stepping on my spine inch by inch. I struggled with hatred, but she always trampled me under her feet. Are you hungry? Lick the mud off my shoes, and I'll give you something to eat. She lifted my chin with the tip of her shoe, and the hatred in her eyes was shocking. I leaned my head forward. She is still laughing. If your deceased mother saw you like this, she would probably be upset in the afterlife. I opened my mouth and bit her foot hard. My teeth feel sore when I bite them, and I taste the blood between my lips and teeth. Joan screamed, and the servants came forward and started to attack me. At this moment, stones flew out from somewhere and hit them. Everyone was bleeding and crying out in pain. They were terrified and fled with Qiao Yi in their arms. In the heavy rain, an umbrella was held over my head. The person who came was a neat and tall young man. I tried to look up. The umbrella covered most of his face. All I saw was his jade-like jaw and the jade pendant around his waist with the word Wei engraved on it. My life was very difficult at that time. My father took me home, but since I was pretty, he just wanted to sell me to someone else. After that, he actually paid more attention to me. The mistress and the younger sister calmed down a lot, but there was still some hatred in their eyes and eyebrows. Over the years, I have been to Wei Xun. From the beginning with that umbrella, it has always been sincere. Now it is this umbrella. It was blown up by the biting cold wind, swirling between heaven and earth, and finally submerged in the lake. 3. A few days ago, Wei Xun came to see me at my house. I arrived at an unfortunate time and saw Qiao Yi pouring tea for him. My cousin is much smarter than me, and she is also very lucky. When my father wanted to marry her to the 50-year-old Marquis Zhongyong as his second wife, she was obedient and insisted on staying in the mountain temple that night. Unexpectedly, she was so lucky that she got entangled with the young master. Now 5 years have passed, and she is looking forward to marrying into the Wei mansion day and night. I remember clearly what Wei Xun said at that time. The sunlight shifted slightly and shone on his hand that was tightly holding the teacup. His voice came through the green screen window. If I really wanted to marry her, I wouldn't have waited 5 years for nothing. That day, I said I was not feeling well and did not see him again. All the soups, embroidered items, and incense I had made for him over the past 5 years now seemed like a joke. When I wake up in the middle of the night, I always dream of my mother lying on the sickbed with the blood she's spitting out soaking the embroidery handkerchief. She called me again and again. Her voice was sad. It's all because of my mother's ignorance. If I were a concubine, you would be a concubine, and you would be despised and trampled underfoot for the rest of your life. In a flash, I dreamed that Wei Xun was holding an umbrella in the heavy rain and frowning at me with disgust. After waking up from the dream, cold sweat soaked my back. My mind finally cleared up. Wei Xun, I won't marry you. My thoughts returned to my mind. I straightened my back, opened the curtain, and walked in. The cold wind howled in the attic, blowing up my veil. For a moment, Everyone was silent. Wei Xun straightened his jaw, raised his eyes, and our gazes met mine. There is a hint of malice in his eyes. The snowflakes melted on my eyelashes and soaked my eyes. Before coming here, I had put our marriage certificate in my sleeve. Staring at that handsome face, I saluted calmly. Master Wei. As these 3 words came out, the atmosphere became subtly tense. The others looked at him and me with puzzled expressions. I took a step forward and spoke calmly. I came here today to tell you something. Let's end our engagement now. His hands were gripping the wine bottles so tightly that they turned pale, but he still raised his eyelids and looked at me calmly. No one dared to speak. Wei Xun lowered his eyes and looked at the wine in the glass, his expression somewhat unpleasant.
Why?
I smiled distantly and repeated everything I said that day. If Master Wei really wanted to marry me, he wouldn't have waited 5 years for nothing. Although I am a woman, I am also quite open-minded. If you had told me earlier, I would not have waited for 5 more years in vain. His face turned pale, and he stood up in surprise. Joe, I kept smiling, took out the marriage certificate from my sleeve, and burned it on the candlestick beside me. Wei Xun took 2 steps forward, then froze again. His calm expression gradually broke apart, and he stared at me with bloodshot eyes. The ashes fell to the ground. The room was silent. I stepped back and smiled at the crowd. Today, I ask everyone to bear witness. From now on, Master Wei and I will have nothing to do with each other. 4. After everyone burned the marriage certificate, I turned around and rushed into the snow and went to Wei's house alone to cancel the engagement. What happened at the banquet that day spread quickly. I haven't had any ties here all these years. When I came to Qiao Mansion at the age of 15, I carry with me the pearl hairpin that my mother gave me before she died, and the medical book she wrote herself. I kept them well protected, along with all the money I had saved. When he was about to hire a horse, he was blocked in the yard by Qiao Yi. She kicked me on my lame leg, knocked me to the ground, and snatched the bag. Why? Do you also feel embarrassed and want to leave? I stood up, but she kicked me down again. You can leave, but I think you are dishonest and stole things from the Qiao Mansion. She tore open the bundle and dumped everything inside onto the floor. The pearl hairpin fell to the ground, and I reached out to pick it up. She had crushed the pearl flower with 1 foot. I quickly held the broken pearl hairpin in my palm to protect it. With a few crackling sounds, the medical book was torn into pieces by her, and the fragments fell over my head like snowflakes. The 2 things my mother left me were both destroyed by her.
Qiao Yi sneered.
A lame man who can't even cure himself wants to learn from others by reading medical books. He is as useless as your mother. I was furious. Unable to control himself for a moment, he bumped into her stomach hard and grabbed her neck with 1 hand. At this moment, I really wanted to strangle her to death. Suddenly, footsteps were heard in the snow behind me. Someone grabbed my arm so hard that I felt it was almost broken. He pulled me off Joey. I turned around and saw Wei Xun wearing a black cloak. The cold wind and the accumulated snow separated us. Joey began to cry quietly. The tears on her cheeks were hanging without falling, and she cried very beautifully. Master Wei, please don't blame your cousin. It was my fault in the first place. The person who started the fight first struck a perfect posture of being hurt. Wei Xun looked at me with a frown on his face, looking unhappy. It's just a pearl hairpin and a medical book. Why did you make such a fuss? My heart suddenly felt like it was tightening, and my vision went dark. Hearing this, I laughed bitterly. But is it? We have already called off the engagement. It seems that you are not qualified to discipline me. In the 3rd year of their engagement, Wei Xun fell seriously ill and did not recover for a long time. I once used my blood as medicine just to make a bowl of medicinal food for him, but he was disgusted and poured the bowl of medicine on the ground in front of me. Seeing my face turn pale in an instant, Wei Xun thought I was petty. It's just a bowl of medicine, so just pour it out. Why are you like this? At that time, I also chewed on the 3 words just for a long time. I once really thought Wei Xun would marry me. but disappointment is only a little bit more. I clenched the pearl hairpin tightly in my palm, and the broken beads pricked me and hurt. He seemed to be startled by my red eyes and did not say anything for a while. I lowered my head and packed my bag. He passed by the two people without looking back. Blood dripped along the broken pearl hairpin onto the snow, like withered red plum blossoms. No matter how well I take care of my leg, I still walk with a slight limp. Every time I walk in a busy city, there will be children following me and imitating my gait, which makes everyone laugh. At first, Wei Xun would stop me. Later, he almost walked with me. I understand that he thinks I have embarrassed him. But from today onwards, the sky is high and the birds can fly freely. The capital city will just be forgotten by me. Although I am lame, I can still see the vast mountains and seas.
5.
Wei Xun locked himself in the room. He didn't understand why he went to Qiao's house when he was clearly hoping that Qiao Ji would change her mind. But things seemed to be getting worse. As Qiao Ji left, he looked at the few drops of blood on the white snow. There was a sharp pain in my heart. But so what? The young master of the Wei family must maintain his self-respect and pride. Qiao Ji was just angry with him. In less than 2 days, she would come back and beg him. She had loved him so much in the past 5 years. How could it change overnight? Wei Xun didn't believe that such a thing could happen in the world. Qiao Ji is just a homeless orphan, and she can only rely on him. Thinking of this, Wei Xun lay down with peace of mind. He had suffered from severe headaches in recent years, and Qiao Ji made many small items for him. It was filled with soothing herbs and smelled faintly fragrant, which helped him sleep. He picked up the headband she had made. The dim candlelight fell on it. Perhaps because it had been a while, the edges of the fabric had become slightly worn. The fragrance also faded a lot. Wei Xun felt his head hurt again. He rubbed his brows and stood up to add incense to the stove. When the lid was opened, there was only a little incense left that Qiao Ji had made herself. He was like a trapped beast, pacing around the room in frustration. The slip of the tongue that day was actually heard by Qiao Ji herself. Wei Xun suddenly felt that he was not a gentleman at all. But she burned the marriage certificate in public, which made me angry and unwilling. The snow that year was like broken jade. Qiao Ji dragged herself, and the hot air she exhaled instantly turned into smoke in the air. I don't know if it was sweat or snow that wet her hair. Her usually snow-white face was now red from the cold, and it was hard not to feel pity for her. Qiao Ji gritted her teeth and dragged him into the cave, without saying a word. He also carefully cleared his tracks to avoid being chased by the criminals. Wei Xun never thought that her leg was injured at that time. He had also heard that Qiao Ji had made embarrassing mistakes at banquets several times. He thought to himself that if she became his wife in the future, he would definitely treat her well, teach her, and prevent her from being laughed at again. But when did all this change? The more I think about it, the more upset I become. Wei Xun sat down and started copying some books, just to calm himself. He knocked on the door twice, and a waiter called him from outside. "Sir, Miss Qiao has hired a horse and is probably leaving the capital." The pen was written crookedly. Drag a long mark on the paper. Wei Xun was so panicked that he couldn't utter a word for a long time. The kid outside the house called out again. "Sir?" Wei Xun hummed lightly and threw the pen aside. After a long time, the candles in the house went out and fell into a long silence. Wei Xun had trouble falling asleep in his tent. His heart seemed to be set on fire by the candle. When the faint light from the sky shines through the green curtains, Wei Xun still didn't understand. He instinctively asked himself, what if Qiao Ji never came back? He kept thinking about this possibility. Finally, I succumbed to my own panic. In that case, he should give her a chance to step down tomorrow. If he is in a bad mood, it should be alright to just coax him into a good mood, right? That night, only Wei Xun himself knew. He didn't sleep a wink all night.
6.
The day I left Beijing, the heavy snow had just stopped and the sun was shining brightly. It's like a person with diarrhea who has just recovered from a serious illness. When I was in Chu with my mother, I rode a horse to make a living. Now I have a slight limp in one leg, but it's not a big deal. But I didn't expect that Wei Xun would catch up with me. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he looked a little haggard. He was stunned for a moment as he looked at me riding on the horse. Aji, I can pretend that the broken engagement never happened. Don't be angry with me anymore. Hearing this, I showed a little disdain in my eyes without hiding it. You see me like a frog in a well looking at the moon in the sky. He jumped off his horse with a pale face and walked closer. If you cancel this marriage, who will be willing to marry you in the future? If you were the mistress of the Wei family, with the power of the Wei family, no one would dare to bully you or laugh at you in the future. I shook my head and didn't want to talk to him anymore. I have never cared much about the Wei family background. I whipped the horse and threw him far behind me. While I was on the ferry, I had already thought that the Qiao and Wei families would inevitably come looking for me in the future. I simply decided not to go to Chu. Boarded the ship to Beiyan. It's good to go with the wind, across the vast sky, looking down at the mountains and rivers. I don't know how much time had passed, but I was about to enter Yan territory. The Wei River along the coast is like silk, with ripples and a faint green. Sitting at the bow, I couldn't help leaning forward to scoop and read a sentence with great interest. The river water is like silk, I pick it up with a gourd. The boat pitched. Someone quickly grabbed my arm from behind and laughed. A big wave, drinking and washing at the same time. I turned and looked. I bumped into a pair of clear eyes. The young man behind me had thick, long eyelashes, and the hand that was holding me was strong and beautiful. The wind messed up her black hair a bit. He quickly let me go, smiling. Excuse me. 7. That day on the boat, I had only a fleeting glance with the young man. After entering Yen, I rented a courtyard in the city to run a medical clinic and cured many women of their hidden diseases. My reputation gradually grew. Women often come in groups to help me with chores. In a blink of an eye, half a year has passed, and life has become more fulfilling and self-satisfied. This place is located on the frontier, and the Northern D occasionally invade. However, there are generals stationed here to guard the place, so the people live in peace. Until that night, the cold rain knocked on the window. A few dirty soldiers came from the next yard and asked me to save them. I hurried over and saw a man lying on the couch. The corners of his robe were soaked by the rain, mixed with dark red blood, which made his cheeks look extremely pale due to excessive blood loss. Seeing me, he smiled with difficulty. It's you. I was stunned. This person was the young man on the boat whom I had met once. Without further ado, I lifted up his robe. His right leg was badly injured, with flesh and blood all over the place, and bones visible. The soldier behind him was already choking with sobs. If it wasn't for saving me, Lieutenant General Wei's leg wouldn't be like this. I have heard of this name since I came to Yen for half a year. The people said that General Jinyuan's deputy General Wei was a natural brave general. When he was 19 years old, he broke into the main camp and took the head of the D general. Later, he helped General Jinyuan repel 30,000 foreign enemies. The D people were defeated for thousands of miles and dared not to attack again. They felt even more sympathetic about Wei Xiaoya's life experience. It is said that he came from a very humble family and was rescued from a slavery by General Jinyuan. At that time, his body was covered with wounds and he was almost dead, but he was still like a wolf cub, holding onto the corner of the general's clothes tightly and not letting go. I lowered my head for a moment and looked straight at Wei Xiaoya. I can heal your leg, but I have to put the broken bones back in place first. The soldier got annoyed and pushed me away. You little female doctor can't even cure your own leg, and yet you dare to talk nonsense here. He turned and shouted angrily. Who invited her here?
Get her out.
Find an older male doctor. I fell to the ground and others were about to come forward. Wei Xiaoya shouted with a hoarse voice. Stop, don't hit her. He staggered and reached out a hand to support me. I stood up and looked seriously at his pale face. I'm 80% sure I can heal your leg. Do you believe me? He answered without hesitation and decisively. I believe it.
8.
I breathed a sigh of relief, my fingers trembling almost uncontrollably. Years of depression came out of my chest. Countless early mornings, I went out with my mother to collect herbs with an empty stomach. The mountain path was rugged, and my feet were covered with blisters. My mother would pick the blisters for me with a needle while she cried. In order to save money on lamp oil, he read medical books under the lantern of a rich man in the cold wind and was almost frozen to the point of losing consciousness. I had no money to buy pens and ink to practice calligraphy, so I used branches to practice on the sand. If I don't write well, my mother will spank me until my palms are swollen. When there were no patients, he would practice on himself, even if his hands were full of bloody holes from the silver needles. When I was 13, my mother fell ill. For money, I went out to practice medicine alone, but someone found out that I was a girl and kicked me out. It rained heavily that night, and I had no money to stay in a hotel. To protect myself, I slept curled up under the eaves of the government office all night. With the sound of rain hitting the eaves, I cried and hated myself for not being a boy. I hate it when people look down on me when I'm practicing medicine because I'm a woman. For the first time in my life, someone believed in me absolutely. And we just met once. So I bowed to him firmly. I will definitely live up to the young general's expectations. I don't know if it was a mistake, but the person on the couch seemed to curl his lips slightly. To me, Wei Xun is a trouble. The best thing to do is to protect yourself and get out of this accident tactfully. But I decided to save him anyway. Rain hits the phoenix tree outside the curtain. It reminds me of the third day after I arrived in Yan area, which was also a rainy day. On the long street, a girl slipped and kicked over the charcoal basket of an old charcoal seller. The charcoal rolled all over the floor, staining the silk boots. In a rage, Jingshi kicked the old man on the knee, forcing him to kneel down and kowtow. A young man with a smile on his face rode past, picked up a stone from the ground, and hit the girl on the head, causing her to bleed. He helped the old man up. The rain soaked his clothes, but his eyes were full of smiles. How can a human kneel before an animal?
I saw this scene clearly.
Yes, how can a human kneel before a beast? All things are empty, except cause and effect. I think an upright and righteous young man should not end up with a lame leg. My leg will never, ever get better. But I must heal Wei Xiaoya's leg.
9.
Wei Xiaoya was very able to endure pain. He refused to take Ma Fei San and let me reconnect his leg bones. A few days after the wound was sutured, he developed a high fever again. I wiped the sweat off his brow and made him drink bowl after bowl of medicine. He was so hot that he tore off his clothes, and I saw many old wounds on his body. There was a knife wound on the chest, only 2 inches away from the heart. The scars are white, but one can still feel the danger at that time. I couldn't help but be stunned and carefully tucked the corner of the quilt for him. Wei Xiaoya gradually got better under my care. But the time he was recuperating next door really gave me a headache. Because of his leg injury, he had difficulty moving and no one was around to take care of him. When it was time for dinner, he would cross one leg, hold the bowl, and look at me pitifully. "You have to feed me." I frowned in confusion and busied myself writing the prescription without even looking up. "I'm not a cook." He calmly took out a heavy piece of silver from his pocket. The silver was placed on the table and made a loud sound. I was silent for a moment and smiled. "What would you like to eat, little general?" Wei Xiaoya smiled, very satisfied with my knowledge. On weekdays, when I was seeing patients in the front yard, he would set up a recliner behind me and watch me. He would often hop on one foot to clean the house and then turn over the herbs drying in the backyard. Occasionally, a few soldiers had some free time to come and see him. Everyone talked about things in the barracks and laughed heartily. I saw Wei Xiaoya holding the wine bottle with his eyelashes drooping, and he looked a little lonely. So the next day, when I was changing the bandage on his leg, I couldn't help but give him some advice. "Haven't you ever heard that the wind and snow pressed down on me for 2 or 3 years?" He shivered his feet a little. 5 years in total? I was choked for a moment. Thinking back to when I first met this person and he spoke, it was obvious that he was illiterate. So he put down what he was holding and stood up to leave. He groaned, pretending to have hurt his leg, and grabbed my sleeve. Little Dr. Qiao, please be merciful, my legs hurt. As soon as I said this, I couldn't help but laugh. Stop pretending. In the blink of an eye, I saw his ears were burning red. Suddenly, a screw-inlaid case was thrust into the palm of my hand, and it was beautifully crafted. He encouraged me to open it with his eyes. Inside is a white jade hairpin inlaid with pearls and emerald green. This quality is better than all the hairpins Qiao Yi has worn on her head in the past 5 years. I was overwhelmed with emotions and handed the box back to him. I was engaged once before and waited for 5 years. Later, I realized that the other party disliked me, so I broke off the engagement. Wei Xun leaned on the edge of the couch. The sunlight was bright, and his brows were also clear. He smiled slightly, not looking surprised at all. So what? I was stunned for a moment. He put the hairpin back into my palm. What others say is their business. You have never given up practicing medicine, and the people you have saved have never looked down on you. Everyone knows that Qiao Ji is the best female doctor in Yen. It's just that you broke off the engagement. What's the big deal? I just want to have a clear conscience and behave uprightly. My eyes are a little blurry. That's not something you would say. Wei Xun tilted his head like a fox and smiled cunningly. So what should I say? He raised his hand and pointed into the void, frowning and cursing. Come here, bring up that idiot who got kicked in the head by a donkey. This lieutenant general is going to smash his head.
I was amused by him.
His eyes also curved into moons. Smile more, okay? The hairpin in my palm felt a little hot. This man was clearly a vicious star that had killed people in a sea of blood and corpses, but in front of me, he was like a sheathed sword. Why did I never feel any danger from him? He is like a fire. It roasted me and made me sweat slightly.
10.
Qiaoji was gone for half a year. Wei Xun felt as if he was living in a stagnant pool. No one would send him porridge cooked by themselves after he got drunk. No one, with a disabled leg, would climb 3,000 steps just to pray for his safety. No one would wait until their eyes turned red to embroider a headband just because he said they had a headache. His former friends celebrated at the banquet. Congratulations, Brother Wei. You have finally gotten rid of a lot of trouble. It turns out that it is in the eyes of others. Is she her own trouble? When he heard this, he was stunned. He didn't even notice that the wine in his glass had spilled. He discovered sadly. These were clearly Qiao Ji's own wishes. After she left, he began to miss her. He recalled the day when Qiao Jilin left, with an expression as if she didn't owe him anything. Yes, Qiao Ji, you don't owe me anything. During the heavy rain in his youth, he held up the umbrella and sheltered the muddy Qiao Ji under it. She looked up, her eyes bright and clear. Even a wolf could tell that she was a pretty girl. Her mistress is a resourceful person and keeps the inner house strictly guarded, otherwise she would definitely be reported to the historian. Wei Xun felt sorry for Qiao Ji and gave her a few words to make her life less difficult. The snowy night that followed. She appeared like a mountain goddess and saved him from being attacked. Repay the life-saving grace with an umbrella. He made the profit. But what was he thinking at that time? It was only because of the instigation of others, saying that she had studied medicine with her mother since she was a child, so how could she have a limp for no reason? He believed that she was deliberately trying to cheat him of the marriage. But Qiaoji decided to leave. Wei Xun then realized that he didn't understand her at all. The girl who was able to save him from being hunted down was naturally very brave. He never understood her. But the judgment has already been made. She didn't even know that her blood was in the spilled bowl of medicine. Without his knowledge, he had already severely trampled on Qiao Ji's true love. He took the headband and sniffed the scent carefully. What smell is there? Wei Xun had a splitting headache and pushed open the door wearing only a single layer of clothes. The personal attendant stepped forward with trepidation. He heard himself ask in a hoarse voice, "How's Chudi doing? Did you find her?" The little girl shook her head. "We have searched the entire land of Chu, but we still can't find Miss Qiao." The moonlight shone on Wei Xun's pale face. The candle turned to ashes, just like the ashes of the marriage certificate that day. He looked slowly at the extinguished candle and looked at it for a long time. Is she okay? It should be good. But suddenly, he really missed her. Wei Xun finally looked at the moon and thought silently in his heart. Qiaoji, you're not in Chudi, where are you? 11. It's winter again. Wei Xiaoya's legs were almost fully healed, and he even took the time to sew a pair of knee pads for me. The stitches are fine, and I really need them. But I just can't imagine what it would be like if the hand that holds the sword to kill the enemy were also holding an embroidery needle. That day, a distinguished person came to the city, and many doctors were invited. I knelt among the crowd and bowed my head. It was said that this nobleman from the capital was attacked on the way, and the doctor he brought with him was hacked to death. A pair of black boots with cloud-patterned brocade surfaces staggered into my sight. I looked up and saw the person approaching. A pale and thin face. It turned out to be Wei Xun, whom I hadn't seen for a long time. When their eyes met, he was ecstatic. "Joe, why are you here?" He stopped talking and muttered in a trance. "Maybe I'm dreaming. The person whom I once loved with all my heart, when I meet again, my heart no longer feels the slightest bit of emotion." He raised his hand to help me. But I stood up, avoided his hand, took 2 steps back, and looked at him calmly and vigilantly. Wei Xun has lost too much weight and looks too haggard. He was still wearing the headband I gave him. I sewed every stitch carefully. The edges of the fabric are now frayed due to rubbing. No matter how clean you wash it, it will inevitably get yellow stains after wearing it for a long time. Just like the 5 years between us. When he saw my unfamiliar movements, his eyes suddenly became red for no apparent reason. "I have been looking for you for a long time, but I didn't expect you to come to Yendi." I remained silent. He reached out and grabbed my arm, having already lost his gentlemanly manners. "Is your leg injury okay? It's rainy and snowy in Yen. You must have suffered a lot. Someone, get the mugwort fumigation stove." I answered him calmly. "Master Wei, don't bother." He looked as if he had been stabbed by a sharp blade. His face was pale, and he covered his heart. "Aji, you still hate me." To be fair, I should hate him. I hate him for convicting me based on his own assumptions. I hate his heartlessness, and I hate the love I gave to him in the wrong way. I hate the 5 years I spent living in the Qiao mansion. But what I hated the most was that year when I kowtowed to the mistress to change the medicine, but ultimately failed to save my mother's life. I have thought a lot since I broke off the engagement with Wei Xun. My mother held my hand tightly before she died. Mother made the wrong choice and wasted half her life. The only thing she is proud of is having you. Her tears seem to be running dry. Aji, you need to find a good husband who truly loves you so that you won't be bullied by those beasts.
I keep having dreams.
I dreamed that I had saved countless lives through my medical practice, and I ran to my mother joyfully, saying that I had a way to cure her illness. Her embrace was warm, but when I woke up, I was filled with tears. Now see you again, Wei Xun. I totally understand. The opposite of love is not hate, but indifference.
12.
The people in the house were cleared out without anyone noticing. The candle flame crackled. Wei Xun was as thin as a shadow, and his voice trembled slightly. Aji, I am sorry for you. Come back to the capital with me, okay? You burned the marriage certificate and wanted to break off the engagement with me, but I didn't agree. My marriage certificate is still here. Come back with me, and we will fulfill the engagement again. I will definitely treat you well. At the end, he held my hand madly. I keep everything you gave me, like this headband, which I carry with me every day. I wanted to pull away, trying hard to control the disgust in my tone. Master Wei, you and I have nothing to do with each other anymore. The door was kicked open at this moment. Wei Xiaoya's face was as cold as ice, and his eyes were sharp, revealing raging anger. The night wind blew up the corners of his robe, like a crane flapping its wings. He looked dimly at our shaking hands and uttered a few harsh words. Give me back my Aji. Wei Xun frowned and his face turned cold. You're Aida? Wei Xiaoya strode over and pulled me behind him. Wei Xun still wants to speak. He saw a flash of cold light from Wei Xiaoya's sleeve, heading straight for his forehead. The headband that I had sewn with my own hands was broken into two pieces by the hidden weapon and fell to the ground. Wei Xun's skills were so advanced that there wasn't even a scratch on his forehead. Deputy General Wei stepped on it and crushed the two pieces of headband under his feet. He raised his eyebrows proudly at Wei Xun. "I'm sorry, I missed it." Wei Xun was out of breath and almost vomited blood. His eyes were bloodshot. "Wei Xiaoye, how dare you? You are just a small servant in the Wei mansion." Was he once a servant of the Wei family? I turned my head to look at him in surprise. Wei Xiaoye held my wrist tightly and smiled nonchalantly. "You know it was once." The light from the candle on the copper table flickered. Wei Xun is a famous nobleman in Beijing. He has always been gentle and kind, but now he looks much thinner, with bloodshot eyes, and looks a little creepy. I didn't want to have any more conflict, so I pulled Wei Xiaoye and turned to leave. Wei Xun grabbed my other arm, his tone filled with pleading. "Aji, in my heart, you are the only one worthy of being my wife." I listened to these words numbly. The mockery in his eyes became more intense. He is still lingering. Wei Xiaoye was born as a servant. Even if he is now a deputy general, how can he compare to a noble family? Don't be fooled by him. I shook off his hand, and he pulled the injured part of his shoulder and couldn't help but hiss in pain. A little bit of blood soaked half of his sleeve. I pursed my lips and trembled. "That's my business. You don't need to care about it." On the way back, Wei Xiaoye held an umbrella for me, and we didn't say a word. As he approached his home, he took a deep breath. "Aji, I didn't mean to hide our origins from you and me. I'm just waiting for the right moment." The light made his face flicker. There was a hint of fragility in those eyes, with a hint of watery color. It's like a puppy that is afraid of being abandoned. The umbrella was mostly on my side, and the snow at half of his shoulder. I raised my hand and brushed away the snow on his shoulders. "Ask him calmly. Wei Xiaoye, have we met before?" A rare blush of embarrassment appeared on his face. He was at a loss for a moment and didn't dare to look at me. I smile.
I think you remember.
13. A moment later, I was sitting in Wei Xiaoye's study waiting for him. He was worried that I was cold, so he hurried to find charcoal. A pile of messy papers on the bookshelf was blown down by the wind. I closed the window and leaned over to pick it up, but I couldn't help laughing. One of the pictures was a casually drawn portrait. Wearing a jade crown, a long robe, and black boots, he has a bit of Wei Xun's aura. A lifelike giant turtle was painted on his face. The blank space was filled with insulting words such as hypocrite, asking you to get engaged, you will be unlucky sooner or later, sinister and shameless, beast in human clothing, etc. The handwriting is ugly and sloppy. It can be seen that the writing standard of the person who wrote the title is quite poor. The signature is written below. I carefully examined the blurred ink marks and was surprised to find that this was 7 years ago. That was the time when Wei Xun and I got engaged. Strangely enough, his handwriting was ugly except for his name, which was beautiful. It actually looks a bit like my handwriting. Wei Xiaoye came in with a charcoal brazier, and when he saw me reading the paper, he quickly reached out to grab it. I asked him with a smile, "That person I met in the stable 7 years ago was you, right?" At that time, Wei Xun loved riding horses. I secretly went to the stable to see his new horse and wanted to give him the saddle I made myself. Unexpectedly, I ran into a teenager being held down by a group of people. No matter how hard others kicked his knees, he refused to kneel. It seems that Wei Xiaoye is still a lowly house slave, but he is more handsome than the sons of powerful and noble families. It is inevitable that he will arouse jealousy and be bullied. I couldn't help getting angry when I saw it, and couldn't help but sneer at him. How can a human kneel before an animal? When those people found out that Wei Xun and I were engaged, they all ran away. The young man lowered his head, his messy hair covering his eyebrows. I asked his name. He kept silent. Perhaps out of sympathy, I took the initiative to get him talking. "My name is Qiaoji. I'll exchange my name for yours. Can you tell me now?" He turned his head away, perhaps because he was embarrassed and didn't want me to see his face clearly. I squatted on the ground and wrote his name with a branch. I know it even if you don't tell me. I just heard them call you Wei Xiaoya. Xiaoya can obviously mean sparrow, but why are you acting like a taciturn person? The man straightened his back and glanced at the words on the ground. I moved closer to him. Xiaoya can also be the fastest horse. Don't be ashamed. It's not a shame to have a poor family background. As long as you have ambition in your heart, you will be able to achieve something in time. After saying that, I smiled brightly at him. He stood there in a daze, watching me walk away. Long-forgotten memories are brought back. Wei Xiaoya's hands froze in place. I turned back and unexpectedly fell into his arms. He held me in his arms and prevented me from seeing his expression. Warm breath poured down, and cold tears flowed down my neck. Later, I learned a lot of words. But the name you wrote is the one I'm best at. I hummed softly, the corners of his lips slightly raised.
14.
After that day, Wei Xiaoya was busy with military camp training. Wei Xun has been here many times. I ignored him, and most of the time, he would just stand far away, staring at me in a daze while I was examining him. Wei Xun gave me a wry smile. Aji, I can explain the previous misunderstandings, and I will definitely make amends in every possible way in the future. I shook my head. It's okay. You don't have to explain. It's not important anymore. He was a little anxious. Are you going to stay in Yendi for the rest of your life and never return to Beijing? I looked at him carefully. I will go back, but not with you. Since I came to Yendi, I have never given up on taking revenge on Qiao Li. The vicious dog lurking in the dark will only show its fangs when the enemy is least alert. I must go back to Beijing, but I have to be confident enough to defeat Qiao Li. When the previous emperor passed away, Princess Zhaoyang assisted the young emperor to ascend the throne. Later, she asked to go to Yen to guard the border. She lived as a widow for many years, closed the door to visitors, and never saw outsiders. I have never seen her in the 2 years since I came to Yen. Unexpectedly, before leaving for the capital, she actually asked Wei Xiaoya to bring a letter to me. Not only I came, but also women from various mansions. Some of the girls came over to greet me warmly when they saw me coming. Miss Aji, you have difficulty walking. Come and sit next to me. I haven't seen you for a while. You've lost a lot of weight. I'll go to the clinic to help you tomorrow. Some people even made faces at me and teased me. How are things going with Vice Admiral Wei recently? I thought back to when I was in the capital. I was trapped in Qiao's mansion and had no one to make friends with. At the banquet, there will surely be thousands of ridicules and sharp attacks. Now I can't help but feel a slight warmth in my heart. The eldest princess was late in showing up, so the female family members scattered to admire the plum blossoms. I found a quiet place and sat down. I saw a young girl standing alone. Her face flushed, and she seemed about to cry. I thought the way she was standing was a little strange, so I looked carefully and saw blood on the stool behind her, and I immediately understood what was going on. So he got up and went over to wipe the bloodstain clean with a silk handkerchief. She was so ashamed that tears fell down her face, as thin as mosquitoes. Thank you, Miss Qiao. It's better not to touch that dirty thing. I counseled her gently. The moon waxes and wanes. The tides rise and fall, and menstruation occurs every month in accordance with this. It is a perfectly normal thing, and there is nothing dirty about it. You don't have to be ashamed of it. She seemed to be hearing this for the first time, and her eyes widened. I handed her the stove. Don't be afraid, I'm a female doctor. Many women have hidden physical discomforts, either during menstruation or after marriage. It's really unbearable to get sick. The girl sat down close to me. But why have I never heard of this? I patted the back of her hand. Most doctors in the world are men. They are embarrassed to tell others about their illnesses, and over time, their illnesses become more serious. If there were more doctors who were proficient in women's medicine, women in the world would not suffer so much. I study this so that I can pass on women's medicine to the world one day. There were footsteps behind me. The eldest princess with slightly gray hair looked at me peacefully. She smiled. Little doctor, you are very good. 15. I hurriedly tried to kneel down, but was supported by the girl next to me. Mom, I want Miss Qiaoji to check my pulse. The eldest princess nodded and asked me to come closer. Although I seldom go out, I have heard that there is a very good young female doctor in Yen. I didn't expect that it was you who broke off the engagement with the young master of the Wei family. Only then did I notice that Wei Xun was standing behind the princess. His eyes stayed on me for a long time without coming back to his senses. The princess noticed it. He couldn't help shaking his head and sighing, and poked his forehead with his finger. You are such a blind child that you sometimes mistake pearls for fish eyes. Wei Xun laughed at himself. The princess grabbed my wrist. Good boy. She gave me a kind smile and asked me gently, do you want to go back to Beijing with me? I looked up in surprise and heard my heart beating wildly. It was already late when we left the princess's mansion. During the 2 years in Yen, I never forgot the hatred towards Qiao's family. The words were on the tip of my tongue, but I didn't know how to tell Wei Xiaoya. It's very cold tonight, but someone is waiting for me at the entrance of the alley with an oil lamp. Frost formed on Wei Xiaoya's eyelashes. I walked home side by side with him. After hesitating for a moment, I finally told him, I have to go back to the capital to do something. He was silent for a long moment, tying the loose knot of my cloak. I stole a peek at him, but ended up running into those smiling eyes. I will also accompany the princess to protect her when she returns to the capital. I had guessed that you would come back one day, so I asked for your permission in advance. I suddenly understood and rushed over to hit him. Okay, you kept it a secret. He then wrapped my fist in his palm. I won't stop you from making any decision. Some things can only be resolved if you do them yourself. I just want to tell you that whenever you look back, I'll always be by your side. So just go for it. I pressed my cheek against his chest. There was a scar through the clothes close to the heart. It was the battle when he was 19 years old. He went deep into the main 10 alone and captured the leader first. He was stabbed in the chest and nearly died. 2 years ago, he wiped out the northern despised in the city and injured his leg while trying to save his soldiers. He was the favorite general of General Zhen Yuan and the defender of Yen. Now it's still him. He put my hand to his lips and kissed it gently twice. Don't worry about me. It's okay, okay?
16.
In late spring, the eldest princess's procession returned to the capital. I went to see my mother's grave. Even though I spent a lot of money to hire someone to look after my child over the past 2 years, I still didn't feel at ease. Who would have thought that I would see people from the Qiao residence digging up the ground at my mother's grave? Madame Liu and Qiao Yi stood at a distance. Having not seen each other for a long time, they did not recognize me at first and just kept talking to themselves. Liu tapped Qiao Yi's head in a reproachful manner. How dare you follow me to such an unlucky place? Qiao Yi stuck out her tongue, looking innocent. Dad has been complaining about me for the past 2 years for not winning Master Wei's heart. He is very disappointed in me. Since the Taoist priest has said that if the resentment from this bastard's grave does not dissipate, it will affect Dad's career, so I will definitely help. Having said this, she smiled proudly again. Who wants that little bitch to always put me down in the past few years? She was just a dog stealing my food. Today I will dig up her mother's grave to relieve my hatred. I was so angry that I almost lost my mind. I seldom cried since I was a child because crying would make my mother sad. After I grew up and she was no longer around, I had even fewer tears. Even though Qiao Yi beat me up and my face was bruised and swollen, I didn't say a word and just bit her until she bled. At this moment, I was trembling all over and my face was cold. When I reached out and touched it, I found tears. I could hear my teeth chattering and I rushed forward, unable to bear it any longer, and slapped Qiao Yi hard. She fell into a puddle of mud, screaming hysterically. I used all my strength and stomped my foot hard on her face. Trampled that disgusting face in the mud in front of the grave. Mother, you see, this is also considered as her kowtowing to you, right? Liu panicked and called out to the busy servants in the distance. Are you all going to die? Capture her for me. I let go of Qiao Yi and slapped that well-maintained face again. They have been regarded as noble ladies in the capital for many years, and they cannot lift anything with their hands or carry anything on their shoulders.
Of course you are not as strong as me.
Lu's face was red and swollen, and she fell to the ground after being slapped by me. Her hair was disheveled, and all the pearls and jade on her head fell to the ground. Seeing that I came alone, she gave me a nonchalant yet malicious smile. Your mother is dead and will not come back to life. I have long seen the viciousness of this woman. Those men came forward one after another and tried to use violence against me. But before it could touch me, the leader's palm was pierced by a flying arrow. That arrow has red tail feathers and comes from Yen. The rest of the people tried to move forward, but were hit on the heads and bleeding by the flying stones. They fell to the ground, wailing and shouting. Who is it? Is he a human or a ghost? The smile on Lu's face gradually disappeared. Joey struggled out of the mud and threw himself towards me, but I grabbed her by the neck and slapped her back into the mud. The moves that Wei Xiaoya taught me personally are really useful. Even though his legs and feet are inconvenient, he is enough to deal with this mother and daughter. I sneered at Lu's horrified expression. He leaned over and whispered every word in her ear. Imitating her tone just now, I explained it carefully and clearly. Your husband, your daughter, and you are all dying. 17. Lu's mother and daughter fled back to Qiao's house with blood all over their heads. After what happened today, Qiao Li will definitely wait and see, and won't dare to do anything to my mother's graves until he finds out where I came from. The wind blew, and the weeds rustled. I held the tombstone in my arms and touched the words on it bit by bit, without noticing that my fingers were cut by the sharp gap. A warm hug came from behind. Wei Xiaoya held me on his shoulders. Aji, cry if you want to. Tears suddenly surged like a raging tide, soaking his clothes. I don't know how long it was before I let him go. There was a horse neighing behind me. Wei Xun staggered off his horse, his hands trembling in his sleeves. He called me calmly. I'm late. I calmed down and told him the truth. Do you know why I can heal Wei Xiaoya's leg but can't heal myself? I was injured while saving you that year. I should have been able to recover, but I later had a high fever and fainted. Lu locked me in the house, wishing I would die immediately so that her daughter could marry you. Later, Qiao Li was worried that my face could not be used by him, so he asked someone to invite a doctor. The delay for these days eventually caused me to suffer from a leg disease. But you, just based on one side of the story, you have presumed that I used inferior means. Wei Xun, you are too arrogant. He stared at me blankly. There seemed to be tears in my eyes. I'm sorry, Aji, I owe you too much, and I only hope to make up for it with the rest of my life. Besides, we should have been husband and wife. I reached out and held Wei Xiaoya's hand. When he was in Yen, in order to heal my injured leg, he climbed a 1,000-year-old snow-capped mountain and almost froze to death in the snow and wind. When he was found, he had a snow ganoderma on his chest. But in life, nothing is perfect. The medicine he risked his life to find could only provide some relief, but could not cure my leg disease. Countless little things fill the empty cavity in my heart. Wei Xiaoya was a man who did 10 things in his heart, but was only willing to say 3 points. I held his warm palm tightly. No need. I already have someone I love. Wei Xun's face turned frighteningly pale. He covered his chest and took 2 steps back. It was difficult for him to maintain his noble demeanor for a moment, and he started to speak without thinking. Aji, you are willing to follow a servant who is driven out of the Wei mansion instead of being with me? My face turned cold, and a fierce look appeared in my eyes. I told you 2 years ago that I never cared about family background. Wei Xiaoya obediently let me hold him and did not interrupt the conversation between Wei Xun and I. But now he couldn't bear it any longer and spoke in a cold voice. When we first met, you were the one holding the umbrella for her, but I was the one throwing the stones. If you can't protect her, I will. He is no longer the little slave who depended on others for his livelihood. The wind blew up the corners of his cyan robe. His eyes were as cold as the night snow, and he looked intimidating. Wei Xun covered his chest miserably and said with hatred, "If I hadn't been confused for a moment, how could you have taken advantage of it and sneaked in?" Wei Xiaoya smiled sarcastically. "Master Wei, I have to thank you very much for your lack of insight. 18. A few days later, I met the noble ladies again at the eldest princess's welcoming banquet. The noble lady who was on good terms with Qiao Yi laughed and said, "Some people may feel embarrassed and afraid to see others after not seeing them for 2 years. If I were her, I would never show up again in my life." Qiao Yi's eyes and brows, covered with a veil, showed a cheerful expression. I remained motionless, as if listening to the wind passing by my ears. Seeing that I ignored them, they became interested in talking about other things. "Have you met the new Lieutenant General Wei who has recently arrived?" On that day, the eldest princess entered the capital, and the emperor went out of the city to welcome her in person. The common people stopped and watched from afar and saw the leading young lieutenant, in a silver-armored and white robe, with an unparalleled bearing. Within half a day, everyone started to find out who this young general was. Hearing this, the noble ladies all looked shy.
Of course I saw him that day.
He was so young and handsome, better than countless men in the capital. He is already a deputy general at such a young age. It's really amazing. They started chattering. Seeing this, Qiao Yi no longer had the heart to sit still. "It's really boring right now, cousin. Can you dance for us to cheer us up?" I raised my eyelids and looked at her calmly. She covered her mouth with a cry. "Forget that your cousin has a lame leg. Why don't you play the piano for us?" It's the same old performance again. She never gets tired of acting. I stood up and pulled off her ugly veil. He raised the corner of his lips calmly towards her. Not good. Under the veil, her purple cheeks were swollen and looked a little scary. Joey burst into tears. "Cousin, I just asked you to play a piece of music. Why are you going so far?" The noble lady beside me immediately spoke up to help me and joined me in humiliating me. A stern voice interrupted them sharply. "Who do you think you are to ask my distinguished guest to play the zither?" Princess Zhaoyang, with her white hair and temples, was standing behind him. All the female members of the family knelt down one after another, not daring to breathe. The eldest princess has been away from Beijing for many years. But who doesn't know her glorious past? Whose family are these women who are so sarcastic and calculating? She helped me up with her own hands and gave instructions with a frown. "Take all those people away and teach them a lesson." The faces of the noble ladies who had spoken to him turned pale. His eyes were like knives stabbing into Qiao Yi. Joshua was so frightened that he fell to the ground and trembled like chaff. A few years ago, I was the discarded person at the banquet. From now on, everyone in the capital knows that I am the eldest princess's distinguished guest. No one dares to look down on me anymore. 7 years ago, the snow was even deeper and heavier, and I couldn't wait for a carriage. Now the feast is over. In the drizzle of late spring, someone leaned on the bridge and held an umbrella for me. "Aji, I'm here to take you home." 19. Before leaving Beijing that day, I also thought about giving up everything. If I went to the government office to sue my biological father, I would first have to roll over the nailed boards in the government office and then be sent to prison for 10 days. If the nail board rolls off, I'll be lucky enough to save half my life. Qiao Li was an official in the same dynasty, so he naturally knew how to operate and kill me in prison. What I want to strike is always the Dengguan drum. Only in this way could this scandal of abandoning one's wife and daughter for the pursuit of wealth be made a big deal. The law states that anyone who beats the drum must be flogged 50 times. 50 lashes, but I had spent 2 years recuperating and was not afraid. I want the Qiao family to be destroyed. Let them drown in the spit of the people of the world. Qiao Li loves fame more than anything else in his life. I struck the Dengguan drum, and it was like a heavy hammer hitting him in the face. I had just received 2 lashes of whipping when Wei Xun rushed out as my fiancé and offered to take the rest for me. In the hall, I calmly told him everything. When I got to the emotional part, countless ordinary people shed tears for me. That day, Lu was frightened by me, and her cheeks turned red with illness. She was dragged into the government office in an unconscious state. Qiao Li's face turned pale, and he stared at me intently. I wish I could eat me alive. I looked back at him calmly, without a trace of fear in my eyes. I certainly don't do anything I'm not prepared for. There are both witnesses and material evidence. The villagers in the countryside testified for me that Qiao Li married my mother and gave birth to me before coming to Beijing. The maid in the mansion testified for me that after I entered the mansion, I was the cousin of the Qiao family and was often abused by the mistress and Qiao Yi. Qiao Li was able to sneer without changing his expression at this time. These are just lowly people. What can they count for? There was a sudden sound from outside the hall. What about me? Wei Xun walked in wearily. When I first met Qiao Ji, she was trampled under the feet of Lu's daughter in the heavy rain. She was so hungry that she had to fight with a dog for food. I couldn't bear it and asked Mr. Qiao a few questions, but he said, "It's better to raise a useful dog than a useless daughter." I was surprised by Wei Xun's appearance. The whole room was in uproar. I knelt down and presented the evidence that I had prepared in Qiao's mansion. Inside was a letter in which Qiao Li colluded with court officials. He wrote this in a letter to the loyal and brave Marquis, who was over 50 years old. "Qiao Ji is also my daughter. If you like her, I will carry her to the mansion in a sedan chair. I only hope you will take good care of her." The origin of this letter is thanks to Wei Xiaoya. Beads of sweat appeared on Qiao Li's forehead. He fell down into the hall as if he had lost his strength and choked out a mouthful of blood. He pointed at me with trembling fingers, blood oozing from the corner of his lips. "Rebellious daughter, if I had known this would happen, I would never have let you and your daughter live to this day." The onlookers cursed him for his cruelty. The eldest princess sat in the hall and had not uttered a word until now. Now he finally stood up in anger. How can such a despicable person be worthy of being a father and an official? He even dares to provoke in the hall.
Someone, come.
Dismiss him from his post, investigate him, and give him 50 strokes of the cane and put him in jail. I kowtowed quickly. "There is one more thing I need your permission for." The sharp dagger in his hand cut through his palm. A large stain of blood flowed along my palm and soon soaked the corner of my robe. "Today, I have sworn an oath of gratitude to my father. I hope your highness will allow me to sever my relationship with the Qiao family." Wei Xiaoya came out from the crowd. His back was covered with lashes, and he knelt beside me. "Aji and I have a mutual understanding. I will pay for the blood she wants to repay." The eldest princess laughed heartily. "Okay." I bowed with a smile and said loudly, "Thank you for your permission, your highness. From now on, I will be the eldest son of the Xun family."
20.
The Qiao mansion was raided and Lu was still ill. Lu's family was afraid of getting themselves into trouble, so they naturally just sat back and watched. Qiao Yi was sent to the manor by the Lu family. All the dirty things I experienced when I was living under someone else's roof were now returned to her. Lu is too ill. Wrapped in a straw mat, he breathed his last in the dilapidated temple. On the day Qiao Li was exiled, people along the way threw garbage at him. Letting him die simply would be a relief to him. The road of exile is 3,000 miles. He would reach that point alive. What awaits him is endless torture. I wanted to laugh out loud, but tears welled up in my eyes first. I once hated studying medicine. Although they are the same age, other girls are still acting coquettishly in their mother's arms. But that time, I wrote the wrong prescription, and my mother hit my palm until it bled. I was so angry that I ran away from home to the capital and happened to see Qiao Li holding Lu in his arms and leaning over to put an exquisite hairpin on her head. I hid in the crowd and listened to him spend 10 taels of silver to buy the hairpin to make the beautiful woman smile. But what about my mother? She had only one old pearl hairpin, and to avoid breaking it, she would usually use a reed stick to tie up her hair. This scene hurt my eyes. I hate it. I hate it when my mother and I eat cold steamed buns and drink cabbage soup. After that, I never hated studying medicine again. My mother knew nothing and just sneaked into my room at night, tuck in the quilt that I kicked off. She put the cool ointment on my palms, kissed my forehead, and said sorry to me over and over again. She doesn't know I'm awake. She knows nothing. I would rather she knew nothing. During those days when I closed my eyes and endured the hardship, I would dream of walking my mother down the long street with our heads held high, and I would buy the most expensive jewelry for her amid the envious eyes of others.
But she died.
Later, I tried many delicacies from land and sea. But what I miss most is the time when my mother and I sat face to face and ate the same bowl of cabbage soup. 21. I looked out at the distant horizon. The ceremonial officer behind him carefully placed the official robe on the table. The table made of rosewood shines in the sunlight. The princess appointed me as a female medical officer to teach medicine to some helpless women. If there are wives of officials who want to learn, they are naturally welcome. More and more women are no longer ashamed of having hidden diseases. The princess happily wished me that one day I could open clinics all over the world. Wei Xun asked to leave Beijing and take up a post elsewhere. After this trip, I don't know when I can return to Beijing. Before leaving, he knocked on the door of the clinic, wanting to see me again. I didn't open the door and said goodbye to him through it. Thank you for helping me at the government office that day. Wei Xun's tone was bitter, and his breathing was suppressed. Recalling the past 5 years, I closed my eyes. I have forgotten everything that happened yesterday, including my death. Master Wei, please forget it too. The sound outside the door gradually faded away. When I opened the door again, I saw a medical book hanging quietly under the eaves. It was the one that was torn into pieces in the snow 2 years ago. After being carefully dried, it was glued back bit by bit. But the writing on it eventually blurred, and the broken marks could not be restored to their original state. The title page has my mother's name, Shenfu. And now I am Shinji. The last spring rain has finally passed. I renovated my mother's grave. Wei Xiaoya was favored by the emperor and stayed in the capital to serve as a commander. He knelt in front of the grave, burning paper for his mother. I looked at the name on the monument, my eyes blurred with tears. Mom, did you see that? You can go now without any worries. A spring butterfly fluttered its wings and flew up, gently touching the water marks on my face. It was like someone's hand was wiping it gently. The butterflies fluttered around and then landed on Wei Xiaoya's fingertips. It was like hugging him gently. I couldn't help but smile at him. Sigh. A horse in the gap, fire in the stone, life in the dream. That year I climbed 3,000 steps to reach the western suburbs Buddhist temple. The wind chimes on the eaves tinkled in the evening breeze, one after another, tapping on the rise and fall of fate. I knelt on the futon and made a wish. I wish my mother's revenge can be avenged. Second, I wish my husband 1,000 years of life. My third wish is for peace in the world, clear rivers and tranquil seas. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the hall. The hair on my forehead ripples, and I have never heard someone whispering behind the statue. Her wish comes true, which is my wish. When asked why the Bodhisattva sat upside down, he lamented that sentient beings were unwilling to turn back. Just happens. All the wrong paths lead us to each other. Extra. Shinji recently asked Wei Xiaoya to learn more about literature and calligraphy to avoid becoming a laughingstock in the officialdom. Thinking that Wei Xun could compose poetry at the age of 3, he was a famous talent in Shangjing. Wei Xiaoya couldn't help feeling indignant. So he held his breath and sat in the study all night learning to write poetry. When Shinji came the next day, he had already fallen asleep on the table. There was a piece of paper under his hand. There is a peerless poem Yong Sun on it.
True, true, true.
Want to kidnap my wife. Look at me fart. Scream at him.